Hey guys, today we're looking at the Stump House Tunnel. This strange unfinished tunnel in South Carolina that was supposedly built in the 1850s, 10 years before the Civil War. The official story says that it was carved out by hand using basic tools, but there are some things about this that doesn't really add up. How did they manage to dig through solid rock with such limited technology? And why was it abandoned? While we're at it, we'll also look at the nearby town of Walhalla, another oddity, a German settlement in South Carolina named after Walhalla, the Nordic afterlife. Well, the mainstream narrative tells us that the idea for the Stump House Tunnel can be traced back to the 1830s when South Carolina's leaders saw the need for a more direct route to the expanding markets of the Midwest. Charleston was losing its economic dominance to cities like Savannah and New Orleans, which had easier trade routes. The proposed solution was the Blue Ridge Railroad, an ambitious rail line that would cut through the Appalachian Mountains and connect Charleston to Knoxville, Tennessee, eventually linking to the Ohio River Valley. However, one major obstacle stood in the way: the Stump House Mountain. The plan called for a nearly 6,000-foot-long tunnel to be blasted and carved through solid granite, a task that, even today, would require significant resources. The project was seen as a massive undertaking, but the state moved forward with it, believing the economic benefits would justify the enormous cost. Construction officially began in 1856, with the workforce consisting mostly of Irish immigrants who settled in a makeshift community near the site, later known as Tunnel Hill. These workers, often laboring in dangerous conditions, used hand tools and black powder explosives to chip away at the mountain. They say that this progress was slow, with only a few feet being completed each day. Reports from the time suggest that funding issues and logistical difficulties plagued the project from the start. Workers faced constant rock falls, poor ventilation, and a lack of proper equipment, making each foot gained a costly endeavor. By 1859, after 3 years of relentless labor, only about 1,600 feet of the tunnel had been completed, less than a third of the intended length. The Blue Ridge Railroad, already struggling with financial mismanagement, was running out of money. South Carolina had already poured millions into the project, but with no clear end in sight, skepticism about its viability began to grow. The final blow came with the outbreak of the Civil War in 1861. The state redirected all available funds and labor towards the war effort, leaving the tunnel project effectively abandoned. After the war, South Carolina's economy was in shambles, and there was little interest or money left to restart the tunnel's construction. Several attempts were made to revive the project in the years that followed, but none really gained enough traction. By the 1880s, the dream of the Blue Ridge Railroad had all but faded, and the tunnel was left as a half-finished relic of an era when South Carolina had grand ambitions of dominating Southern trade. Officially, the story ends with financial ruin and the shifting priorities of a post-war South. But as with many abandoned megaprojects, there are always questions about whether the official narrative tells the full story. So wait, they're telling us that by 1859, the state of South Carolina had invested over $1 million into the construction of the Stump House Tunnel. Despite the substantial budget, only about 1,600 feet of the planned 5,863-foot tunnel had been completed. If we adjust this for inflation, that $1 million would be roughly $350 million in 2025. They poured all this money into the tunnel, yet they barely made it a third of the way. And we're supposed to believe that this project was just abandoned because of the Civil War. Even if the war disrupted funding, why didn't they resume construction afterward, especially with the supposed economic benefits it promised? Beyond that, the official story tells us that Irish laborers, armed with nothing but hand tools, black powder, and sheer determination, somehow managed to carve through solid granite for 3 years under grueling conditions. Keep in mind, this wasn't soft limestone or clay, This was some of the hardest rock in the region, working in near darkness with the constant risk of cave-ins and poor ventilation. How much progress could they have realistically made? And if this method was so slow and inefficient, why even attempt such a massive tunnel with these limitations? Now, I titled this video Tunnel to Hell because, well, one, it is pretty creepy, and two, once you get so far inside the tunnel, there's this brick wall with an iron gate, installed by Clemson University during their blue cheese curing experiments in the 1950s. They say they built this to protect the cheese from visitors, but I can't help but wonder if there are other motives or other activities concealed behind this barrier. And the choice of Stump House Tunnel for this cheese production is kind of curious. The tunnel had been abandoned for nearly a century when in 1940, a Clemson professor identified its cool, damp conditions as ideal for curing blue cheese. This led to Operation Blue Cheese, where the university utilized the tunnel until 1956 before moving operations to campus. Now, that's what they tell us, but it really looks like they're boarding off the rest of the tunnel. I actually have a weird story about this. Back in 2016, before the channel, before I was even looking into any of this, we actually ended up here by accident. We were just planning to hike Yellow Branch Falls when we saw a tunnel and thought, what's that? So, we walked down it, and I remember thinking it was creepy, but I have zero memory of the brick wall. At first, I thought that maybe it was a different tunnel, or maybe I just forgot that detail. But then I looked back at some old photos that I took that day, because luckily I happened to snap some pictures, and it was definitely the Stump House Tunnel. I even have shots of the shaft with the light shining through. And the only explanation I could come up with was that maybe the gate was open back then, but apparently it has been locked since 2010. So, I don't know what to make of that. I clearly remember seeing the shaft, I have pictures of it, but I don't remember the brick wall at all. Not saying it's proof of anything, just a bizarre little thing that stuck with me when I went back and rewalked the tunnel. Apparently the brick wall has been there since the 1950s. Anyway, there's something else that doesn't really add up, and it's that this isn't the only tunnel. There's a middle tunnel that has collapsed, and there's also the saddle tunnel entrance that's now flooded. So wait, there are more tunnels? If this was just one failed attempt at cutting through the mountain, why were they working on multiple tunnels at once? And if they barely got halfway through the main Stump House tunnel before running out of money, why even start on these others? It does make you think, what exactly were they trying to do here, and why so much effort was put into something that, according to the official story, they just up and abandoned. So this time, we actually went on top of the tunnel, which to be honest, was pretty sketchy, definitely not something I'd recommend. I could barely hold my phone steady while trying to get the recording. But up there, there's this insane vertical shaft, and I wasn't even sure if this was the same one that's behind the brick wall inside the tunnel. You can't really see the bottom at all. No idea what it was originally meant for or why it was built this size, but it's sitting right on the top of Stump House Mountain, which interestingly enough, used to be home to an old town called Tunnel Hill. Apparently around 1,500 people lived here back when the tunnel was being built. The town had a schoolhouse, a Catholic church, a post office, and several saloons. But today nothing remains. No ruins, no foundations, just gone. What does remain though is a graveyard, but not a normal one. There's no headstones, no names, just unmarked rocks marking where bodies were buried, which definitely adds to the creepy factor up here. I won't go too deep into it, but this area is popular for hiking the Yellow Branch Falls Trail and the Issaqueena Trail. I wanted to talk about her though, as she is an important legend. But before I forget, I wanted to mention that on Yellow Branch Falls Trail, towards the end of the trail, we noticed some stonework on the hill, and there's no real explanation for what this wall is. It also seems like it is hollow behind it, but I wasn't really sure what it could be. But yeah, wanted to mention that there are probably many more mysteries here waiting to be discovered. Back to Issaqueena. So there's this legend around here about a young woman named Issaqueena. The story goes that she was a Choctaw maiden who was captured by the Cherokee and given the name Katichi. Interestingly, both these names mean the deer's head. She fell in love with a white trader named Alan Francis. One day, she overheard the Cherokee planning a surprise attack on the settlers. Determined to warn her lover, she embarked on a daring midnight ride, naming the creek she crossed by their distance: 6 Mile Creek, 12 Mile River, and so on until she reached the settlement at 96. Thanks to her warning, the settlers were able to prepare and fend off the attack. Afterward, Issaqueena and Alan got married and started a family, but the Cherokee didn't forget her betrayal. They eventually tracked her down, forcing her to flee. In a desperate move, she leaped off a 100-foot waterfall. The warriors assumed she had perished, but in reality, she landed on a hidden ledge behind the cascading water and survived. The waterfall is now known as Issaqueena Falls. There are a few versions of this tale. In some, Issaqueena is a Cherokee maiden who falls in love with a Oconee brave. In others, her lover is a white silversmith named David Francis. Some stories say they both leaped over the falls to escape, choosing to die together rather than be captured. In another version, after her daring escape, Issaqueena and her lover settled in Alabama. Regardless of the version, the legend has left a lasting mark in the area, with places like 6 Mile and 96 still bearing the name she supposedly gave them during her ride. I don't know what to make of that, but it is interesting, the part where she lands on a ledge behind the waterfall, as it reminds me of the video on Brevard. There is a marker near Brevard that discusses the lost settlement of the Conisty from 1725, that apparently these people mysteriously vanished by entering a doorway into another realm. This entrance was behind the waterfalls and led to a land of green pastures and woodlands even finer than the ones they left behind. So yeah, that's Stump House and Issaqueena, but let's dive into Walhalla because there are some interesting details as well. It's a very small town. Walhalla was founded in 1850 by the German Colonization Society of Charleston, a group of immigrants from northern Germany who, after arriving in Charleston, couldn't find land that suited their needs or budget. Led by General John A. Wagner, they purchased 17,859 acres from Reverend Joseph Grisham in the Pickens district for $27,000. They named their new settlement Walhalla, which they interpreted as the Garden of the Gods. It's intriguing that these German immigrants, seeking a fresh start, chose to settle in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, an area that would have presented significant challenges for agriculture and transportation during this time. Even the town's name, Walhalla, is pretty strange as it references the Norse mythological Hall of Slain Warriors, which seems an unusual choice for a group of Christian settlers. By 1868, when Oconee County was established, Walhalla was designated as the county seat. Over time, the predominantly German population was diluted by an influx of settlers from other backgrounds. It's a small town with your typical downtown look, but one of the things I found strange is this whole German Colonization Society. It sounds like just a bunch of immigrants getting together and deciding to settle land, but there isn't much detail on this society that started in Charleston, other than the founders. As I was looking into this, I came across the German Colonial Society, which was actually formed later and had ties to German nobility and expansion efforts, which would make more sense. The German Colonial Society was founded in 1887, decades after the German Colonization Society of Charleston. It emerged from the merger of the German Colonial Association from 1882 and the Society for German Colonization from 1884, both of which had direct backing from German aristocracy and political elites. The society was headquartered in Berlin and worked closely with the Pan-German League, becoming a major influence in Germany's push for overseas territories. By the early 20th century, it had over 42,000 members, all dedicated to promoting Germany's global expansion and colonial ambitions. While the German Colonization Society of Charleston came first, the similarities in structure and name are interesting. But this German Colonization Society was actually a descendant of the German Friendly Society of Charleston, which, if you look at it closely, seems like an obvious fraternity. Some kind of secret society for Germans in early Charleston. Almost like a Masonic lodge, but with a distinct German influence. It was an all-male society, strictly for those of German descent, and they were devoted to 3 core principles: industry, justice, and charity. 3 goals. Sound familiar? They were also responsible for aiding widows and orphans of members, so in a way it functioned kind of like a German Oddfellows Lodge. They even had their own meeting halls, but the original building was destroyed during the Civil War. Whether or not there was a direct Freemasonic connection, the structure and purpose of the society seems way too similar to be a coincidence. Fraternal orders were a big deal back then, and if this group wasn't officially tied to Masonry, it was at least operating in a very similar fashion. However, it seems pretty clear to me that this was just another Masonic order, hidden in plain sight. To understand this, we have to look into friendly societies, which if you actually examine them, make no secret of their Masonic origins. Their symbolism is right there, in your face. A friendly society was on the surface a fraternal organization created for insurance, pensions, and cooperative banking. But that's just the cover story. Dig a little deeper and you'll find that many of these groups followed the same structures, rituals, and iconography as Freemasonry. There were countless variations, like the Ancient Order of Foresters and the Ancient Order of Shepherds, and if you look at their certificates and regalia, it's impossible to ignore. They're Masonic offshoots. The same symbols, the same secretive traditions, just under different names to fit different social and cultural groups. The German Friendly Society was no different. It was just the German branch of the same fraternal network, operating under a slightly different title, but with the same hidden connections. I bring this all up because essentially, we see the same story with every city. Why is Freemasonry and royalty always connected to city foundings? It is suspicious, really. The mainstream story is that these were just simple settlers looking to start a new life. So why do you need a secret society in the founding of a city? Or was it actually just founded? There's a Blue Ridge Masonic Lodge in Walhalla that goes back to 1867 from what I could find. There isn't that much history on it, other than some listings of Master Masons, and while it is kind of small and doesn't seem to be the original building, what I found strange is that one of these lodges in the area have a yearly ritual called the Stump House Degree. Now I'm not saying there's anything sinister about it, but let's be real, it's kind of bizarre. These days they perform it outside the tunnel, but supposedly they used to do it inside the tunnel itself, which is even weirder. I don't really care what their explanation is. Why would a bunch of old men want to meet up at night in a pitch black wet tunnel to initiate someone into a ceremonial degree? It's just not something you usually hear about when people talk about this tunnel, and it does make you think, why was this particular spot chosen for a Masonic ritual? Now another interesting aspect is that there's another Walhalla in Australia that kept coming up during research. Surprisingly enough, it also features tunnels. And then its history is steeped in Freemasonry. They have a lodge that was founded in 1877. The Australian Walhalla, located in Victoria, was established in 1863 during a gold rush. The town became one of Australia's richest gold mining areas, with the long tunnel extended gold mine producing approximately 13.7 tons of gold before its closure in 1914. The presence of extensive mining tunnels is a striking parallel to the Stump House Tunnel in Walhalla, South Carolina. And another interesting thing, the Walhalla Masonic Lodge in Victoria, established in 1877, is one of the oldest Masonic lodges in the region. The lodge, originally a church built in 1866, has been a cornerstone of the community, showcasing the significant role Freemasonry played in the town's development. The fact that both Walhallas not only share a name, but also feature significant tunnels and a strong Masonic presence is more than a mere coincidence. It's almost like they discovered these tunnels and resources first, and then decided to call it Walhalla, Garden of the Gods, which would be a very Freemasonic thing to do. In South Carolina, they attribute the name to German settlers, but in Australia, there doesn't seem to be a clear explanation for why a remote gold mining town was given the same mythological name. Could it be that both locations were chosen because of what was already there? Natural tunnels, underground passageways, and valuable resources, rather than the name simply being a coincidence. Now let's just take a second to think about this. 8.5 kilometers of tunnels, dug by hand, with picks, shovels, and black powder, all while dealing with solid rock, cave-ins, flooding, and toxic gases. And we're supposed to believe they pulled this off in the late 1800s with no advanced machinery? Sure, gold was a powerful motivator, but the sheer scale of this operation raises some serious questions. How long would this have actually taken with that level of technology? And why is it that so many of these massive underground works, whether in Australia or South Carolina, always seem to be explained away as nothing more than ambitious frontier projects, when in reality they would have been logistical nightmares even with modern equipment? It makes you wonder how much of this history is really accounted for. Okay, but back to Walhalla in South Carolina. The downtown is interesting. I found this old photo and took a shot from roughly the same angle today to see the difference. It does seem that many of these buildings go below street level as well. The first building that really stuck out to me was the Walhalla Graded School. It looks completely different from the rest of the buildings downtown, and what's strange is that it supposedly was built in 1901. But I find that suspect because this is the exact site where Newberry College used to be. And yet, when you try to find construction photos of the graded school, there are none. That is odd for a structure built in 1901, a time when photography was widely used to document major projects. Now, the history of Newberry College in Walhalla is full of contradictions. Officially, there was a structure here by 1868, but the historical marker claims it was active from 1866 to 1877, before being relocated back to Newberry. Founded by German settlers, the college was supposedly moved after struggling post-Civil War. But I found a postcard of Smeltzer Hall with a postmark from Walhalla, South Carolina in 1878, which raises questions about when exactly it was still here and when it actually left. It says that by 1868, the college had been despoiled after the war, meaning it was clearly there before 1868. But why are there no surviving images or records of the structure in Walhalla before they moved it? The story we're given is that the Board of Trustees just changed their minds and sent the college back to Newberry in 1877. But that doesn't really make sense. Why build a structure, establish an institution, and then suddenly decide it needs to be moved back? And here's where it gets even stranger. There's a detailed drawing of Newberry College in 1860 before the war, when it was still in Newberry. And this thing looks pretty insane. The structure in the drawing is massive with an architectural style that doesn't match what you would expect for a small southern town in 1860. The problem is, when the college was moved to Walhalla, we have no drawings, no photos, and no clear descriptions of what it looked like there. Then after barely a decade, it was supposedly moved back to Newberry, where they built a completely different structure in its place. So what happened to the Walhalla version of this college? Was there actually a structure on the graded school site before 1901? Or is the graded school a repurposed version of an older building? Who knows, but what is strange is that the graded school appears to go below street level, and you can see the same thing with the gym building. And if this was really built from the ground up in 1901, why were the finishing touches never completed? It's bare brick, as if something was either left unfinished or stripped down. These kinds of anomalies keep popping up in places like this. The lack of records, the shifting dates, and the contradictions in the history only make it weirder. Another structure worth mentioning is St. John's Lutheran Church, founded in 1853 by members of the German Colonization Society of Charleston, who established the town of Walhalla in 1850. The church was constructed between 1859 and 1861 under the direction of John Kaufmann, a master builder from Germany. This timeline is intriguing considering the challenges of that era, including limited resources in the onset of the Civil War. The narrative tells us that 38 settlers from the society purchased nearly 18,000 acres for $27,000 in 1850. They began building homes on Main Street, but without a railroad in the early days, obtaining resources would have been extremely difficult. It's also worth noting the connection between the Lutheran Church and Rosicrucianism, as Luther's seal is literally the Rosy Cross. One would expect that a group of German settlers founding a town would preserve more of their heritage beyond just breweries. Today, there doesn't seem to be a significant German-speaking community in Walhalla. Supposedly, they all transitioned to speaking English. It's possible, but still strange to see a German-founded town in South Carolina with no real German community left. They do have Oktoberfest celebrations and German-oriented shops, but an actual German-speaking community seems absent. I could be wrong on that, but I didn't find much evidence of it. I'll leave it at that. I'm sure there's a lot more to uncover here, but these were the main things that stood out to me. The Stump House Tunnel is definitely the highlight. It just feels so out of place, and the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. If you're from the area or know something that I missed, drop a comment or reach out. I'd love to hear if there's anything else nearby worth checking out. Maybe there's even more hidden history in Walhalla that's waiting to be explored. If you enjoyed the video, please share with your friends and family. And all we can hope is that our minds may be unveiled.
Let go of everything you think to be true. Relax the mind and ask the question, do I truly understand what this reality is?